If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Continuing, the sun was setting over the Blue Ridge Mountains when little Michael ran to finish sweeping the mansion's immense yard. His small hands, marked by early calluses, gripped the broom handle tightly while his watchful eyes observed the antique clock on the porch. He had only 10 minutes before Deborah, his stepmother, returned from the social gathering in Aspen. If he didn't finish on time, he knew what awaited him. "Michael, where are you, boy?" The voice of Thaddeus, Deborah's brother, echoed through the estate, making the 11-year-old boy shiver. "I'm finishing the yard, Uncle," he replied, quickening his broom strokes over the leaves that stubbornly fell from the trumpet trees. The Henderson mansion was one of the most imposing in the region. Built in colonial style, with wide verandas and ornate windows, it symbolized the success of Robert Henderson, one of the biggest agribusiness entrepreneurs in the American Midwest. What few knew was that behind those stone walls and noble wood, the owner's son lived a reality very different from the wealth displayed. Thaddeus appeared in the yard, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Your stepmother called. She wants everything impeccable for dinner tonight. The gardener called in sick, so you'll have to prune the rose bushes too." Michael swallowed hard. The rose bushes were Deborah's pride, and he had never been allowed to touch them. "But Uncle, I've never handled roses. I might ruin them and—" He didn't finish the sentence. Thaddeus grabbed his arm forcefully, bringing his alcohol-flushed face close. "Are you questioning me? Do you want me to tell your stepmother you're being rebellious again?" The boy lowered his eyes. "No, sir, I'll take care of the roses." Ever since his mother, Caroline, had passed away after a long illness 3 years ago, Michael lived under the strict regime of his father's new wife. Robert, always immersed in business trips and endless meetings, barely noticed what was happening at home during his absences. Deborah, a 35-year-old former model, had won over the widower with her charm and promises to care for his son as if he were her own. The reality, however, proved to be quite different as soon as the marriage was officialized. In the spacious, modern kitchen, Mrs. Eleanor, the cook who had worked for the family for over 20 years, watched Michael through the window as she prepared dinner. Her heart ached to see the boy, who once ran happily through the gardens, now hunched over the plants, fear etched in his eyes. Several times she tried to talk to Robert about the treatment his son received, but Deborah always found a way to interrupt or discredit her words. "That boy needs discipline, Eleanor. Robert spoiled him too much after his mother died. I'm just educating him for life," was what her employer always said when the cook tried to intercede. Michael cut his finger on one of the rose thorns. A drop of blood dripped onto the white petal, but he quickly wiped it away, fearing that any imperfection would result in further punishment. The previous night, for accidentally spilling a little water on the imported living room carpet, he had been forced to sleep in the garden tool shed without dinner. "Michael, come here," Mrs. Eleanor called softly, making sure Thaddeus had gone back inside the house. When the boy approached, she handed him a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. "Eat this quickly. The mistress will be here soon, but you need to eat." The boy smiled gratefully. That small gesture of kindness was like water in the desert of his routine. "Thank you, Mrs. Eleanor. You're the only one who—" "Shh," she interrupted, hearing the sound of a car approaching. "Finish the roses. Your father called earlier. He said he's returning from Washington, D.C. tomorrow." A spark of hope lit up the boy's brown eyes. Robert was coming back. When his father was home, Deborah completely changed her behavior, transforming into the loving and attentive stepmother everyone believed her to be. Michael knew it was just an act, but at least it meant a few days of truce. What the boy didn't know was that this time, Robert would return earlier than expected. The next morning, while cleaning the second-story windows, Michael saw his father's car entering the mansion gates. His heart pounded with joy, but fear soon took over. He hadn't finished his chores, and Deborah had been clear about the consequences if he didn't complete everything before lunch. "Useless, boy. You can't even do that right." Deborah's voice echoed down the hallway as she quickly ascended the stairs, irritated to realize her husband had arrived unannounced. Finding Michael still holding the cleaning cloth, she violently snatched it away, pushing the boy against the wall. "Your father's here and you're still up here. What will he think if he sees this shoddy work?" "Sorry, stepmother," Michael murmured, using the term she demanded when they were alone, a cruel way of reminding him that he would never take the place of his real mother. Get down now and help Eleanor in the kitchen. And don't you dare look like you're about to cry near your father, or you know what happens." Michael ran downstairs, but upon reaching the landing, he ran straight into Robert, who had just entered. The tall man, with an imposing bearing, greying at the temples, smiled upon seeing his son. "Michael, how you've grown in these past months," he exclaimed, opening his arms for a hug. The boy hesitated for a second, glancing up the stairs where Deborah watched the scene with a forced smile. He ran into his father's arms, feeling safe for the first time in weeks. "I missed you, Dad," he said, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to reveal everything he was experiencing. Robert noticed something different in his son's eyes, a shadow that wasn't there the last time they saw each other. He also noticed that the boy seemed thinner, with dark circles under his eyes that didn't suit a child his age. Deborah descended the stairs gracefully, as if moments before she hadn't been threatening her stepson. "Darling, what a wonderful surprise. Why didn't you let me know you were coming today?" she asked, kissing her husband while casting a warning glance at Michael over Robert's shoulder. "I wanted to surprise you. The negotiations in Washington, D.C. finished earlier than expected, and I couldn't bear being away from you both any longer," Robert replied, still embracing his son with one arm. "Is everything all right here?" "Everything's great," Deborah quickly replied. "Michael has been very dedicated to his studies, hasn't he, dear?" Her tone was sweet, but her eyes conveyed a clear message to the boy. "Yes, Dad. Everything's fine," Michael replied, lowering his gaze. What none of them knew was that that afternoon would mark the beginning of a great change in the Hendersons' lives. Robert would start to notice the small inconsistencies in his wife's and brother-in-law's behavior, and what he would discover in the coming days would forever change the fate of that family. Robert Henderson was never a man to let details go unnoticed. As a successful agribusiness entrepreneur, he had learned to observe patterns and identify anomalies. 3 days after his unexpected return, he began to notice strange behaviors in his own home. During breakfast, Michael accidentally knocked over a glass of juice. Instead of reacting like any child, with a simple "sorry," the boy panicked, trembling as he tried to wipe away the orange liquid spreading across the white tablecloth. Sorry. I'll clean it all up, I promise." "It was an accident," Michael's voice came out in gasps, his wide, fearful eyes fixed on Deborah, who was smiling tensely from across the table. "Calm down, son. It's just juice," Robert said, confused by the exaggerated reaction. "Accidents happen." "Michael has been very nervous lately," Deborah interjected, gently placing her hand over her stepson's. "I think he misses you when you travel, don't you, dear?" The boy merely nodded, still trembling, avoiding looking directly at his stepmother. Later that day, Robert overheard a conversation between Deborah and Thaddeus in the library. He was approaching the door when he heard raised voices. "He came back earlier than planned. How are we going to finalize the transfer now?" Thaddeus's voice sounded irritated and anxious. "Keep calm, we have time. Dr. Miller guaranteed the papers are almost ready." "Robert trusts me blindly and my concern for the assets of our future," Deborah replied in a calculating tone. "And the kid? He could ruin everything if he opens his mouth. Michael knows very well what happens if he disobeys me. Besides, Robert never listens to what that meddling cook tries to insinuate." Robert silently retreated, his heart pounding in his chest. What transfer would this be? Who was Dr. Miller? And why did Michael obey Deborah so blindly? That night, unable to confront his wife without concrete proof, Robert decided to act. He called Augustus Perry, an old college friend who now worked as a private investigator. "I need you to investigate some things for me, Augustus. It's delicate, it involves my family," he explained in a low voice, locked in his office. "How you can count on me, Robert. What's going on?" Robert explained his suspicions, the conversation he had overheard, and most importantly, his son's strange behavior. "Something isn't right in my own home, and I need to find out what it is." Augustus promised to start the investigation immediately. "I'll need access to your accounts, emails, and schedule, and it would be good if you found a pretext to travel for a few days, so I can observe their behavior when you're not around." Following his friend's advice, Robert announced during dinner that he would need to travel to London for 3 days. "Urgent matters with investors," he justified, carefully observing the reactions of those present. Michael lowered his eyes, disheartened. Deborah, on the other hand, could barely hide her enthusiasm. "What a shame, darling. Just when you've returned," she said, feigning disappointment. "But business doesn't wait, does it?" Michael and I will be fine. Don't worry." Robert noticed a slight tremor in his son's hands when Deborah mentioned his name. The next day, before leaving, Robert sought out Mrs. Eleanor in the kitchen. The grey-haired woman was preparing lunch, humming softly. "Eleanor, I need to ask you a question," he began, closing the door to ensure privacy. "How has Michael been treated when I'm traveling?" The cook stopped chopping vegetables, her expression suddenly worried. "Master, I've tried to tell you so many times—" "Speak now, Eleanor, please." "The boy suffers a lot, Mr. Robert. Mrs. Deborah, she's not what she appears to be. She makes the poor boy work like an adult, punishes him for every little thing, sometimes doesn't even let him eat properly." Tears welled up in the old woman's eyes. "I try to help as I can. I give him food secretly, comfort him when he cries. But I'm afraid of losing my job if I interfere too much." Robert felt his blood run cold. "And why did you never tell me this before?" "I tried, Master, I swear I tried. But Mrs. Deborah always showed up or said I was making things up, that the boy needed discipline. Once she even threatened to fire me when I insisted." At that moment, Robert knew his suspicions were well-founded. He thanked Eleanor, asked her to continue looking after Michael discreetly, and left for London with a heavy heart, but determined to uncover the whole truth. During the 3 days he was away, Augustus Perry worked tirelessly. He installed discreet cameras at strategic points in the mansion, investigated Deborah's and Thaddeus's financial movements, and even managed to record compromising conversations. When Robert returned, Augustus was waiting for him at a discreet cafe in downtown Aspen. "What did you find?" Robert asked anxiously, as soon as he sat at the secluded table where the investigator was waiting for him. Augustus pushed a brown envelope across the table. "It's worse than we imagined, Robert. Your wife and her brother are in cahoots with Dr. Henry Miller, your former partner, to transfer a large part of your assets to offshore accounts." Robert opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photos, documents, and a flash drive. The photos show secret meetings between them. The documents are copies of contracts Deborah tried to forge with your signature. And the flash drive? Augustus hesitated. "The flash drive contains videos of how your son is treated when you're not home." Robert watched the videos right there, on the laptop Augustus brought. Each image was like a dagger thrust. Michael being forced to clean the entire house, while Deborah and her friends laughed in the living room, the boy sleeping in the tool shed on a cold night, Thaddeus pushing the boy forcefully when he was slow to obey an order. "My God," Robert murmured, tears streaming down his face. "How could I have been so blind?" "There's more," Augustus continued gravely. "I intercepted emails between Deborah and Miller. They plan to incriminate you for tax fraud using falsified documents. Once you were under investigation, Deborah would assume control of the companies as your proxy." "And Michael? What would his role be in all this?" "From what I understand, the plan was to remove you from the boy, claiming you were emotionally unfit to raise him after the supposed scandal. Deborah would get custody and, consequently, manage the portion of the inheritance that rightfully belongs to Michael after your first wife's passing." Robert felt a fury he had never experienced before. For years he had dedicated himself to business, believing that his new wife was taking good care of his son and the home. The betrayal was complete, on all levels. "What do you intend to do?" Augustus asked, concerned by his friend's determined look. "First, I'm going to ensure my son's safety. Then I'm going to expose every one of them." Robert put the evidence in his jacket pocket. "Can you continue monitoring the house? I'll need time to plan the next steps. Of course, the cameras are still active, and I'm keeping an eye on all their financial movements." Robert returned to the mansion that same afternoon, pretending nothing had changed. He had dinner with the family, listened to Deborah's lies about how well everything had gone in his absence, and observed his son, quiet and downcast at the table. That night, when everyone had retired, Robert went to Michael's room. He found the boy still awake, drawing by the dim light of the bedside lamp. "What are you drawing, son?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Michael quickly hid the drawing under his pillow. "Nothing important, Dad." Gently, Robert took the drawing. It was a landscape, a simple house by a lake, with trees around it and a cloudless blue sky. Far from the opulence of the mansion where they lived. "It's a beautiful place," he commented. "Would you like to live in a place like this?" Michael's eyes lit up for an instant. "It would be good." "Calm, no shouting." "No shouting." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "No." Michael hesitated, looking at the closed door as if he feared someone might be listening. "Nothing, Dad. Just a quiet place." Robert hugged his son tightly, knowing he would soon take that fear from his eyes. "One of these days we'll visit a place like that, just the two of us, I promise." He didn't imagine he would keep that promise sooner than expected, nor the circumstances that would lead him to it. The rain falling over the Blue Ridge Mountains that night seemed to wash away the mountains and the sins. Robert had planned to act calmly, gather more evidence, prepare the legal ground to expose Deborah and her accomplices. But destiny sometimes quickens our steps. Returning from a meeting in Oxford earlier than anticipated, Robert found the mansion seemingly empty. He parked the car and entered through the back door so as not to wake anyone. He heard raised voices coming from the outdoor shed, that same place where Michael had once been forced to sleep as punishment. "You're absolutely useless. I can't do anything right," Thaddeus's voice echoed in the rainy night. Robert's heart pounded. He approached silently and through the crack in the half-open door saw a scene he would never forget. Michael cowering in a corner, protecting his face with his arms, while Thaddeus intimidated him, a belt in his hand. "It was an accident, Uncle. I didn't know those papers were important," the boy pleaded, trembling with fear and cold. "An accident? You spilled coffee on documents that took weeks to prepare. Do you know how much time and money we lost because of you?" Robert didn't wait any longer. He violently pushed the door open, startling Thaddeus, who turned around, surprised. "Robert, I didn't expect you back so soon," his brother-in-law stammered, quickly hiding the belt behind his back. "Get away from my son, now." Robert's voice was low, controlled, but laden with an icy fury that made Thaddeus step back. "It's not what it looks like. Michael here disobeyed Deborah's direct orders and—" "Now!" Robert thundered, advancing. Michael ran into his father's arms, sobbing. Robert hugged his son and looked into Thaddeus's eyes with determination. "You have exactly 10 minutes to pack your things and get off my property. If you're still here when I get back, I won't be responsible for my actions." Leaving a pale Thaddeus behind, Robert led Michael into the house. In the living room he found Deborah speaking on the phone, clearly agitated. "No, Dr. Miller, we need to speed everything up. Robert is suspicious, I'm sure. Yes, the documents are—" Wait, she froze upon seeing her husband and stepson at the door, the boy still crying. "I'll call you back," she murmured into the phone before hanging up. "Robert, what a surprise. I didn't expect you to—" She approached with a forced smile, but he raised his hand, interrupting her. "I just found your brother about to assault my son in a freezing shed during a storm. Care to explain that?" Deborah's expression instantly changed, adopting a worried look. "Oh my God, Michael must have disobeyed again. You know how rebellious he's been lately. Thaddeus was just trying to discipline him, I'm sure. That boy invents every story." "Enough with the lies, Deborah." Robert kept his voice calm as he hugged his son. "I know everything. The fraudulent transfers, the forged documents, your plan with Miller. And most importantly, I know how you've been treating my son." Deborah's face paled. Her eyes, previously feigning concern, now revealed pure hatred. "You don't know what you're talking about. Who's been putting these ideas into your head? It was that meddling old woman from the kitchen, wasn't it?" At that moment, the doorbell rang. Robert smiled. "That must be Augustus. He has some evidence to show you, dear." As he headed for the door, with Michael still clinging to him, Deborah rushed to the phone. Robert heard her quickly murmur, "He knows. Come here now." Augustus Perry entered, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Good evening, Robert. I brought backup as we arranged." The events of the next few hours unfolded like a movie. Thaddeus was apprehended, trying to flee through the back of the property. Deborah, seeing herself cornered, still tried to destroy compromising documents but was prevented. When Dr. Miller arrived, he found not the ally he expected, but the police waiting with a search and seizure warrant. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged contracts, suspicious transfers, and videos showing the mistreatment of Michael. Deborah, Thaddeus, and Miller were taken in for questioning, while Robert remained in the mansion with his son trying to calm him. "It's over, son. No one will hurt you anymore," he promised, hugging the boy who was still trembling. Michael looked at his father with tear-filled eyes. "Will they come back, Dad? Stepmother said no one would believe me, that I'm just a silly boy." "She lied, Michael, as she lied about many things, and no, they won't be coming back. Eleanor prepared hot chocolate for Michael and stayed by his side while Robert talked with Augustus in the library. "What happens now?" the businessman asked, physically and emotionally exhausted. "They should be detained initially. The evidence is solid, especially the financial documents and the videos, but—" Augustus hesitated. "But Miller has a lot of influence, and cases like this, involving public figures like you, attract media attention. Michael will have to testify eventually, relive all this." Robert ran his hands over his face, thoughtful. "I don't want to expose my son to more trauma. He's already been through too much." It was that night, seeing Michael finally fall asleep after so much crying, that Robert made his decision. He would remove his son from that environment, from those painful memories, at least until the case was resolved. He remembered Michael's drawing, the simple house by a lake. By coincidence or destiny, Robert owned such a property, a small isolated farm near the Lake District, which he had inherited from his grandfather and rarely visited. It was the perfect refuge. The next morning, while Michael was still asleep, Robert made the necessary arrangements. He called his trusted lawyer, instructing him on how to proceed with the case. He asked Eleanor to prepare the essential things for the boy, and he telephoned Joachim, the old caretaker of the farm, informing him that they would arrive that afternoon. When Michael woke up, he found his father sitting on the edge of his bed. "Good morning, son. I have a surprise for you. Remember that drawing you made? The house near the lake?" The boy's eyes opened a little wider. "I remember. How about we go to a place like that, just the two of us away from here for a while?" For the first time in a long time, Robert saw a genuine spark of hope in his son's eyes. The journey to the Lake District lasted just over 2 hours. As they moved away from the mansion and the city, Michael visibly relaxed. When they left the main road and turned onto a dirt track that wound through verdant hills, the boy even ventured a smile. "Is it far, Dad?" "About 10 more minutes. It's a small farm that belonged to your great-grandfather. We haven't been there in a long time, but Mr. Joachim takes care of everything." Clearbrook Farm wasn't as luxurious as the mansion in Aspen, but it had its own charm. The main house, in a colonial country style, stood on a small rise overlooking a crystal-clear lake. An orchard stretched on one side, and on the other there was a small stable with a few horses. It was a peaceful place where time seemed to slow down. When the car parked in front of the veranda, they were greeted by Joachim, a 70-year-old man with sun-weathered skin and a welcoming smile. "Mr. Robert, it's been a long time, and this must be little Michael. The last time I saw you, you were just this tiny," he said, indicating with his hand the height of a baby. Next to Joachim was an elderly woman with white hair tied in a bun, wearing a floral apron. "This is my wife, Mrs. Constance. She's eager to stuff you both with homemade food," Joachim introduced, laughing. Constance approached, observing Michael with perceptive eyes. Without saying anything, she just opened her arms. In a gesture that surprised Robert, Michael ran into the old woman's embrace, as if instinctively knowing he could trust her. "Let's go inside, my little angel. I made cornmeal cake with guava paste and there's fresh coffee," she invited, guiding the boy inside. While helping Joachim unload the bags, Robert briefly explained the situation, asking for discretion. "Don't worry, Master. No one will find you here, and you can trust Constance. She raised 6 children, 2 grandchildren, and always had a special way with hurt children, inside or out." The first few days on the farm were for adaptation. Michael, accustomed to being punished for any small mistake, became tense when he dropped something or was slow to answer a call. Robert realized that his son had lost his childish spontaneity, replaced by a constant state of alertness and fear. Mrs. Constance, with her simple wisdom, was the one who began to break this barrier. One morning when Michael knocked over a cup during breakfast, the boy froze, awaiting a reprimand. Instead, the old woman just smiled. "Do you know what my grandmother used to say, my little angel? That broken crockery is a sign of good luck." She knelt beside him and began to gather the pieces. "Let's clean this up together, and then you can help me make some pumpkin preserve that I was going to teach you anyway." Gradually, with patience and affection, they created a new routine. Robert, for the first time in years, completely abandoned work to dedicate himself to his son. In the mornings, they walked together around the lake. In the afternoons, Joachim taught Michael to ride a horse or fish, and at night they sat on the veranda to observe the stars, while Robert told childhood stories. A week after they arrived, During an especially strong storm, Robert found Michael huddled under the covers, trembling. "What's wrong, son? It's just rain. We're safe here." "I'm afraid of thunder," the boy confessed, ashamed. "Stepmother used to say it was punishment for disobedient children." Robert felt a pang of anger, quickly replaced by determination. He sat on the bed and hugged his son. "Thunder is just a sound of nature, Michael. It's not punishment, nor does it have anything to do with behavior. It's just the energy-laden cloud releasing its force." At that moment, Mrs. Constance entered the room carrying a steaming mug. "I brought hot chocolate to chase away the fear," she said, sitting on the other side of the bed. "Did you know the wind carries sadness away?" Michael looked at her, curious. "What do you mean?" "It's a story my grandmother used to tell. She said that when we're sad or scared, we can tell our troubles to the wind and it carries everything far away, transforming the pain into clouds that later turn into rain, which then nourishes the plants, and so sadness turns into new life." That night marked a turning point in Michael's recovery. For the first time, he opened up about some of the abuses he had suffered, telling his father and Mrs. Constance how he was forced to stay in punishment for hours on end, how Deborah humiliated him by calling him weak like his mother, how Thaddeus threatened to hurt him if he told his father anything. Robert listened to everything with a broken heart, silently vowing that he would never allow his son to suffer again. After Michael fell asleep, exhausted from crying, he went to the veranda and let his own tears fall, mingling with the rain that was still falling. Mrs. Constance found him there, offering him a mug of coffee. "The boy will be fine, Mr. Robert. Children have an incredible capacity to recover. They just need time, security, and a lot of love." "How could I have been so blind, Mrs. Constance? How did I not realize what was happening under my own roof?" The old woman sat beside him, her wise gaze fixed on the rain. "Sometimes we see what we want to see. The important thing is that now you are here, whole, present. That's what will heal Michael's wounds." The next morning, when Robert woke up, he found Michael in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Constance prepare breakfast. The boy was timidly smiling as he stirred the cake batter. It was at that moment that Robert was certain. There, on that simple farm, far from luxury and appearances, they had finally found a true home. What he didn't know was that in London, new problems were beginning to form. Henry Miller had been released on bail, and his powerful contacts were already plotting revenge that would threaten the newly found peace of father and son. 3 weeks had passed since Robert and Michael had taken refuge at Clearbrook Farm. Away from the city's hustle and bustle and the pressures of their previous life, the boy was beginning to transform. His smiles, once rare, became more frequent. He no longer flinched when someone raised their voice or made a sudden movement. With Joachim's patience, he learned to ride the dappled horse he named Thunder, a small victory over his fears. Robert observed these changes with a heart full of hope, but his mind was still divided between the comforting present and concerns about the open case he had left behind. He regularly spoke on the phone with his lawyer, Dr. Paul Andrews, and with Augustus Perry, who continued to monitor Deborah's, Thaddeus's, and Miller's movements. One sunny afternoon, while Michael was fishing with Joachim in the lake, Robert received a call from Augustus. "We have problems, Robert." The investigator's voice sounded tense. "Miller was released on bail and is leveraging his influence. They've secured a powerful lawyer, Octavius Barnes, an expert in defamation and public opinion manipulation." Robert sat in the veranda chair, watching his son in the distance, laughing at something Joachim was saying. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means they're preparing a counter-offensive. Deborah is painting the picture of a dedicated wife who was unfairly accused. She's already given tearful interviews saying you had a nervous breakdown and kidnapped your own son." "That's absurd," Robert exclaimed, gripping the phone. "We have proof of the mistreatment, the fraud, and they have a team of lawyers working to discredit that evidence. They're claiming the videos were manipulated, that the financial transfers were legitimate, and worse, they're spreading rumors that you've always been an absent father and are now holding Michael captive, away from the medical care he supposedly needs." Anger swelled in Robert's chest. Medical care? Michael never needed special treatment. According to Deborah, the boy has psychological problems and needs constant supervision. She's saying you fled with him to prevent the diagnosis from coming to light. Robert closed his eyes, trying to control his fury. What kind of person invents something like that about a child? "The kind who would do anything for the money at stake," Augustus replied grimly. Robert, they're managing to turn the tables. The press is starting to question your sudden disappearance with the boy. We need a plan. At that very moment, miles away, in Octavius Barnes's luxurious office in London, a strategic meeting was taking place. The judge hasn't yet issued the order to search for the boy, but we're close, the lawyer explained to Deborah and Henry Miller. Thaddeus, who was out on conditional release, was not present. We need to continue building the narrative of a concerned mother and an unstable father. Deborah dabbed at fake tears with a silk handkerchief. After weeks of detention, she had secured provisional release, thanks to Barnes's efforts. I'm genuinely worried about Michael. Robert might be filling his head with lies against me. Miller, who had remained quieter since his release, interrupted. What worries me is the investigator. This Augustus Perry continues to collect evidence. We need to neutralize him somehow. Barnes smiled confidently. We're already taking care of that. I've hired someone to track his movements. If we find out where Robert and the boy are, we can act quickly. Picking up a folder from the table, he continued. Meanwhile, I've prepared some documents that need to be strategically leaked. Deborah examined the papers. Forged medical reports suggesting Michael suffered from emotional instability. Declarations from witnesses claiming to have seen Robert act aggressively. Articles ready to be published on blogs and manipulable news portals. Will this work? She asked, finally showing a spark of uncertainty. Trust me, Barnes replied. When we're done, Robert Henderson will be seen as an unbalanced businessman who lost control after making unfounded accusations against his devoted wife. The court will grant you custody of the boy and, consequently, control over his portion of the inheritance. Back at the farm, Robert shared the troubling news with Joachim, while Constance distracted Michael in the kitchen, teaching him to make homemade bread. They won't give up easily, Joachim. We're talking about a lot of money and power, and now they're attacking my reputation, trying to paint me as a negligent father. The caretaker, always sensible, pondered for a moment. If you'll permit me, Mr. Robert, you need more help. I know someone who might be useful. My nephew, Claude, was a police inspector for many years in London. He took early retirement after exposing corruption in the department. He's a man of integrity, knows the ins and outs of the law, and understands how these people operate. Robert considered the suggestion. Is he trustworthy? We can't take risks. I'd vouch for him with my life. Claude faced threats to do what was right. Now he lives on a small country estate about 20 miles from here, raising bees and translating books. But I know he would help, especially if he knew it was to protect a child. That same night, as a storm was forming again over the Blue Ridge Mountains, Claude Sampson arrived at the farm. He was a middle-aged man with closely cropped grey hair, shrewd eyes, and a posture still marked by his years on the police force. He listened attentively as Robert explained the situation, occasionally making notes in a small notebook. It's a classic strategy, he commented after hearing everything. Discredit the victim, reverse roles, manipulate public opinion. Barnes is known for that. I've crossed paths with him in some cases. I never managed to prove it, but I'm sure he bribed witnesses. What can we do? Robert asked, feeling increasingly cornered. First, we need to find out their next steps. Your friend Augustus is doing a good job, but he needs support. I'll get in touch with some old reliable colleagues. Second, we need to protect this place. If they discover where you are, they'll try to use force to take Michael. Do you think they'd go that far? The idea seemed absurd to Robert. Claude looked at him seriously. With what's at stake? Without a doubt, they would probably come with a fabricated court order and a bought-off police escort. Third, he continued, we need more concrete evidence. The videos are good, but they can be challenged. We need something irrefutable. The former inspector made some calls that very night, activating a network of old colleagues and informants. By morning, he already had news. Barnes has hired a photographer, a certain Ronald Lynch, an expert in paparazzi photos and private investigations. He's trying to locate you. Additionally, they're preparing an emergency lawsuit claiming risk to the boy's well-being. The situation was becoming more serious by the moment. Robert, after a sleepless night, made a decision. We're going back to London and facing them directly. No, exclaimed Claude. That's exactly what they want. If you show up now, Barnes will already have the ground prepared. The press, the judiciary, everything in their favor. We need to turn the tables first. It was Joachim who suggested the solution. And if the mountain won't come to Mohammed, then Mohammed must go to the mountain. the caretaker said, with an enigmatic smile. "If this photographer is looking for you, we'll let him find you, but on our terms." The plan was risky, but it had potential. They would discreetly spread information about Robert and Michael's whereabouts, but they would prepare a trap for anyone who came with ill intentions. With Augustus's help, who traveled to the farm the next day, they ironed out the details. While the adults planned, Michael continued his journey of recovery. On a particularly significant afternoon, Mrs. Constance found him sitting alone by the lake, drawing. "What beautiful thing are you making, my little angel?" she asked, sitting beside him. Michael showed her the drawing, a colorful representation of the farm, with all of them on the veranda. Robert, Joachim, Constance, and himself, all smiling under a radiant sun. "It's our family," he said simply. Constance felt her eyes well up. "Yes, we are a family chosen by the heart." Michael remained silent for a moment, contemplating the crystal-clear water of the lake. "Will stepmother be able to take me back?" he finally asked, his small voice revealing the fear that still persisted. The old woman caressed his hair. "No, my dear. Your father and our friends won't let that happen. Remember the story of the wind? Sometimes we need to face the storm to later have the calm." Not far from there, hidden among the trees on the neighboring property, Ronald Lynch adjusted his long-range camera, finally having found his target after days of searching. He photographed Michael and the elderly woman talking by the lake, then the boy playing with a dog, and finally Robert leaving the house to join his son. "I found you," he murmured, satisfied with himself as he sent a message to Octavius Barnes. What Ronald didn't know was that his presence had already been detected. Claude, using his years of investigative skills, had set up a security perimeter around the farm, with improvised sensors and strategic observation points. "He's here," Claude informed, returning to the house after checking the surroundings. "Exactly as we predicted. He's taking photos from the other side of the lake." Robert felt a shiver. The idea of being watched, of Michael being photographed unknowingly, deeply disturbed him. Now what? "Now we let him take the photos he needs, but we control what he sees," Augustus explained. "Meanwhile, Claude and I will prepare our counter-offensive." Over the next 2 days, they carefully staged a routine for Ronald's watchful eyes. Michael spent more time inside the house, appearing only at specific moments, always looking healthy and happy. Robert made sure to be seen reading with his son, playing, preparing meals. Images that directly contradicted the negligent father narrative Deborah was trying to construct. At the same time, Augustus and Claude put together a meticulous plan. With disguised recording equipment, they managed to record Ronald receiving explicit instructions by phone from Barnes, who explicitly asked for photos that showed the boy looking sick or mistreated. The trap was set. Now it was only a matter of time until the conspirators made their next move. And when they did, Robert would be ready. In London, Deborah examined the first photos sent by Ronald with evident disappointment. "These won't do. The boy looks happy, healthy. I need images that prove my version." Barnes watched his client with growing irritation. "Calm down. Ronald is good at what he does. Soon we'll have what we need to convince the judge." What none of them imagined was that, at that exact moment, the evidence that would incriminate their plans was already being gathered, and the true nature of the conspiracy against Robert and Michael would soon be exposed for all to see. At the farm, as night fell, Robert sat on the veranda with his son, both watching the first stars appear in the sky. "Dad," Michael called, his voice more confident than Robert had heard in a long time. "We're going to be okay, aren't we?" Robert hugged his son, feeling a renewed determination. "We are, son. I promise you. This battle is far from over, but we will win it together." What they didn't know was that the decisive battle was approaching faster than they imagined, and it would be in court before everyone that the truth would finally come to light. The London courthouse was packed that Thursday morning. Journalists, curious onlookers, and legal professionals crowded to follow what was already being called the Henderson case, a legal battle that had made headlines in recent weeks. On one side of the room, Deborah, impeccably dressed and made up to look like the devastated wife, sat beside Octavius Barnes. From time to time she brought a handkerchief to her eyes, pretending to wipe away tears that never quite fell. Thaddeus was discreetly positioned a few seats behind, while Henry Miller had opted not to appear, fearing to further compromise his already shaken reputation. On the other side, Robert waited with his lawyer, Dr. Paul Andrews. Michael was not present. By the judge's own recommendation, the boy would be heard separately in a special room adapted for children's testimonies, only when absolutely necessary. When Judge Richard Sterling entered, the room fell silent. A middle-aged man known for his impartiality and rigor, the magistrate showed no favoritism for either party, despite Barnes's attempts to influence him behind the scenes. We are here to evaluate the situation of the minor Michael Henderson, son of Robert Henderson and the late Caroline Henderson, currently in the custody of his father, the judge began, adjusting his glasses. There are serious accusations from both sides that need to be clarified before any decision regarding custody. Barnes was the first to speak, presenting his version of events with the theatrical eloquence that had made him famous. Your Honor, we have before us a tragic case of a man who, unable to cope with his own failures as a father, fabricated absurd accusations against his devoted wife. Deborah Henderson has been an exemplary mother to Michael since she married Robert, filling the void left by the boy's biological mother. As the lawyer spoke, carefully selected images were projected. Deborah smiling alongside Michael at social events, helping him with homework, hugging him at birthday parties. All meticulously staged performances over the years precisely to create this facade. However, Barnes continued, when Robert began to face financial difficulties due to unsuccessful investments, he chose a despicable path, accusing his own wife of mistreatment and misappropriation of funds to divert attention from his own failures. Robert clenched his fists under the table, suppressing his anger at the blatant lies. Dr. Paul touched his arm, silently reminding him to maintain composure. Worse still, Your Honor, Barnes continued, raising his dramatic tone. Robert kidnapped his own son, depriving him of the essential medical care the boy needs due to psychological problems developed after the loss of his mother. He kept the child isolated, possibly manipulating his perceptions and memories. At this point, Barnes presented the forged medical reports, along with testimonies from specialists who had never even met Michael. When it was the defense's turn, Dr. Paul Andrews calmly rose. Unlike Barnes's theatrical presentation, Robert's lawyer opted for a direct and objective approach. Your Honor, I will not try to move you with elaborate stories. I will present facts, concrete evidence of what truly happened at the Henderson residence. With a gesture, he requested permission to play some of the videos captured by the cameras Augustus had installed. The judge agreed, and the courtroom plunged into a heavy silence as the images showed the real Deborah, screaming at Michael for minor infractions, forcing him to perform tasks unsuitable for his age, confiscating his food as punishment. Deborah squirmed in her chair while Barnes desperately tried to object. Your Honor, these recordings were obtained illegally. They cannot be considered as evidence. The recordings were made by a licensed investigator, hired by Mr. Henderson after legitimate suspicions, Dr. Paul retorted. Furthermore, they were made on my client's property, where he has every right to install security systems. The judge allowed the videos to continue. When they finished, the murmuring in the room was uncontrollable. Deborah had completely abandoned the facade of a devoted wife, her face contorted in barely contained fury. Dr. Paul proceeded, now presenting the financial evidence. We have here documents that prove attempts at fraudulent transfers, forged contracts with Mr. Henderson's signature, and communications between Mrs. Deborah, her brother Thaddeus, and Mr. Henry Miller, my client's former partner, explicitly planning to take control of the family's assets. As the documents were examined by the judge, Augustus Perry discreetly entered the room, sitting next to Robert. Leaning in, he whispered, "We just received the photographer's recordings. Claude is on his way with Michael." Robert nodded, feeling both relief and apprehension. The decisive moment was approaching. After the initial presentation from both sides, the judge called for a 1-hour recess. When the session resumed, the atmosphere was even more charged. Claude Sampson had arrived, accompanied by Michael and Mrs. Constance, who had insisted on coming to provide emotional support to the boy. "Before we proceed, I have additional evidence to present," Dr. Paul announced. "With Your Honor's permission, I would like to play a recording obtained less than a week ago." The judge consented, and the video began to play. It showed Ronald Lynch, the photographer hired by Barnes, receiving explicit instructions over the phone. "I don't care how you get it, Ronald. I need photos that show the boy looking distraught, sick. something that proves our thesis. If you don't find it naturally, create the situation. I'm paying well enough for it. The voice was unmistakably Octavius Barnes's. The lawyer rose furiously. This is a setup, a manipulated recording. The recording underwent technical analysis, as per the documentation I am now presenting, Dr. Paul replied, handing the reports to the judge's assistants. Furthermore, we have the testimony of Mr. Lynch himself, who decided to cooperate with justice after realizing the extent of the manipulation involved. Ronald Lynch was called to testify, and visibly nervous, confirmed that he had been hired to obtain photos that would incriminate Robert, even if he had to distort reality. Mrs. Deborah specifically requested images that showed the boy in poor condition, even if I had to photograph him from the worst possible angles or during moments of natural fatigue, the photographer confessed. The room erupted in comments. Deborah shouted accusations of betrayal, while Barnes tried in vain to control the damage. The judge had to threaten to clear the room to restore order. When calm finally returned, the magistrate made an unexpected announcement. Considering the sensitive nature of this case and the evidence presented so far, I would like to hear from Michael Henderson himself. However, given the circumstances, I will allow him to speak right here in everyone's presence if he so wishes. It was a tense moment. Robert looked at his son with concern. Would it be too much for the boy to face all this? But Michael, after a brief moment of hesitation, nodded, willing to speak. With the gentle guidance of a judicial psychologist, Michael sat in a specially positioned chair from where he could see his father, but did not have to face Deborah directly. Michael, the psychologist began in a soft voice, can you tell us what your life was like in the house with your father and your stepmother? The boy took a deep breath before responding. His voice, initially low, gained firmness as he spoke. After my mother passed away, my father was very sad. He traveled a lot, worked very hard. When Deborah arrived, at first she was nice to me, but only when my father was around. Michael continued, gradually recounting how the situation had changed after the marriage, the unfair punishments, the excessive chores, the nights spent hungry or in the cold garden shed. He spoke about how Thaddeus intimidated him, and how he lived in constant fear of making mistakes. Once, he recounted, his voice choked, I knocked over a vase that belonged to stepmother's family. It was an accident I was dusting, as she told me. She got so angry that the boy hesitated, and the entire room held its breath. She locked me in the basement for a whole day without food. She said it was for me to learn to be less clumsy. Deborah couldn't contain herself. Lies! You've always been a problematic child inventing stories. The doctors confirmed your disorders. Silence, ordered the judge, casting a severe look at Barnes, who had failed to control his client. Mrs. Henderson will have an opportunity to speak. Now we are listening to the minor. Michael, startled by the outburst, sought his father's gaze, who conveyed confidence with a discreet nod. Michael, the psychologist continued, how do you feel living with your father on the farm now? The boy's face visibly lit up. It's the best place in the world. I can play, draw, help Mr. Joachim with the animals. Mrs. Constance teaches me to cook, and my father reads stories with me every night. No one yells at me when I make a mistake. And do you know why you're here today? Yes, stepmother wants to take me back, but I don't want to go. I want to stay with my father. Looking directly at the judge, with a courage that surprised even Robert, Michael added, Please, don't send me back to her. The simplicity and sincerity of those words had a greater impact than all the legal arguments presented until then. Even some journalists disguised their tears. The judge, visibly moved, thanked Michael and asked that he be escorted out by Mrs. Constance while the trial proceeded. When it was Deborah's turn to testify, her facade as a devoted wife had completely disintegrated. Confronted with the evidence and Michael's testimony, her answers became contradictory, her accusations increasingly desperate. Robert was always an absent father. I tried to give the boy structure, discipline. That's what he needs, she screamed, completely losing her composure. Barnes tried in vain to redirect the interrogation, but the damage was done. When Thaddeus was called, he opted for a different strategy. He began to implicate Deborah and Miller as the true architects of the plan, trying to diminish his own involvement. It was their idea, I just followed orders, he claimed, provoking another outburst from Deborah. At the end of that long day of hearing, Judge Sterling announced that he would make his decision after considering all the evidence and testimonies. He scheduled the sentencing for the following morning. Robert spent the night at the hotel with Michael, Mrs. Constance, and Joachim, who had insisted on coming for the final decision, as he called it. Augustus and Claude joined them for dinner in an atmosphere of cautious hope. "How are you feeling, son?" Robert asked when they were finally alone in the room. Michael, already in his pajamas and ready for bed, reflected for a moment. Relieved. "For having told the truth. You were very brave today. I'm proud of you." The boy smiled, but then quickly became serious again. "Dad, if we win tomorrow, what will happen to stepmother?" Robert sat on the edge of the bed, surprised by the question. "She'll probably have to answer for her actions. She might go to prison for a while." Michael nodded slowly. "You know, I was very afraid of her. I still am a little. But Mrs. Constance told me that holding on to anger is bad for us." "Mrs. Constance is a wise woman," Robert agreed, moved by his son's maturity. "I don't want to hate stepmother," Michael concluded, lying down. "I just want her to stay away and not be able to hurt me anymore, or hurt other children." Robert kissed his son's forehead, feeling a mix of admiration and protection. "Sleep well, my son. Tomorrow will be a new day." The next morning dawned sunny in London, contrasting with the tension that hung over everyone as they returned to the courthouse. The room was even more crowded, many wanting to witness the outcome of the case that had captured public attention. Michael stayed in the anteroom with Mrs. Constance and Joachim, while Robert, Dr. Paul, Augustus, and Claude took their seats. On the other side, Deborah seemed to have aged 10 years since the previous day. Barnes maintained a professional demeanor, but his eyes revealed the imminent defeat. When Judge Sterling entered and everyone rose, Robert felt his heart quicken. Everything depended on this moment. "After careful analysis of all the evidence and testimonies presented," the magistrate began, "this court has reached a clear conclusion." The silence in the room was absolute, as the judge detailed his verdict, enumerating the evidence of mistreatment, the attempts at financial fraud, the orchestrated defamation campaign against Robert. "Therefore, I rule that full and exclusive custody of Michael Henderson shall remain with his father, Robert Henderson. Mrs. Deborah Henderson is prohibited from approaching or attempting contact with the minor by any means." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a growing murmur. Robert closed his eyes for a moment, feeling a relief so profound it almost left him without strength. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I will forward all documentation of this case to the public prosecutor's office for criminal investigation of those involved in the financial fraud and mistreatment of the minor. I also order an investigation into the ethical conduct of attorney Octavius Barnes with the Bar Association." Deborah covered her face with her hands, finally crying genuine tears. Not of sadness for the loss of her stepson, but of anger and frustration at seeing her plans destroyed. Barnes remained impassive, probably already calculating his own defense strategies for the upcoming proceedings. Upon leaving the courtroom, Robert found Michael waiting anxiously. A single smile from his father was enough for the boy to understand. Everything was all right now. They had won. As everyone was preparing to leave the courthouse, something unexpected happened. Michael, holding his father's hand tightly, stopped when he saw Deborah being escorted out under everyone's gaze. For a brief moment their eyes met, the defeated ex-stepmother and the boy who was finally free from her dominion. To everyone's surprise, Michael spoke, his voice clear in the silent corridor. "I forgive you." 3 simple words that left Deborah momentarily speechless. There was no excessive kindness in Michael's gaze, nor sentimental reconciliation, just the quiet strength of one who chooses not to carry the burden of hatred. Robert hugged his son by the shoulders, and together they walked towards the sunlight streaming through the large courthouse windows, leaving the shadows of the past behind. The battle was over. It was time to rebuild their lives, away from those who had tried to destroy them. Back at Clearbrook Farm, where a true new beginning awaited them. A year had passed since the trial that forever changed the lives of Robert and Michael Henderson. Clearbrook Farm, once merely a temporary refuge, had become a true home. The colonial house had been expanded, with new wings and spaces adapted to welcome special visitors, children who, like Michael, had faced traumatic situations and needed a safe environment to recover. On that sunny September morning, Robert watched from the veranda as Michael, now 12, taught an 8-year-old girl to ride Thunder. the dappled horse that had become his inseparable companion. Little Anna, who had arrived just 2 weeks prior, smiled shyly, her first genuine smile since being brought to the farm after being rescued from a situation of family neglect. "That's right, Anna. Hold the reins firmly, but without pulling too hard," Michael instructed, with the patience of someone who knew the path to recovery from personal experience. The transformation of his son throughout that year was something that still amazed Robert. The frightened and submissive boy had given way to a confident and compassionate preteen. The nightmares that tormented him in the first weeks at the farm became increasingly rare until they disappeared completely. The emotional scars, though never entirely erased, had transformed into an early wisdom that Michael now used to help other children. "He has a gift with the little ones," Mrs. Constance commented, approaching with a tray of freshly squeezed orange juice. At 73, the old woman maintained the energy and welcoming heart that made her a fundamental part of the healing process for all the children who passed through the farm. "He certainly does," Robert agreed, accepting the glass she offered. "Sometimes I wonder if he saved me, and not the other way around." After the trial, Robert had made a decision that surprised the business world. He definitively stepped away from the direct management of his businesses, delegating administration to trusted executives, while dedicating himself to the project that was now his passion, Rainbow House, a shelter for vulnerable children. The idea had arisen naturally, during a conversation with Michael a few months after the trial. "Dad, are there other children like me? Who went through bad things?" the boy had asked while they were fishing in the lake. That simple question awakened in Robert a realization that would change the course of his priorities. Using part of his fortune, and with the support of Claude, who knew the intricacies of the child protection system, he transformed Clearbrook Farm into an officially recognized space for temporary shelter and therapy for traumatized children. The place maintained its welcoming essence, but now boasted a team of professionals, psychologists, occupational therapists, educators, who worked together to help each child overcome their specific traumas. Activities with animals, contact with nature, and the simple routines of the countryside proved to be powerful healing tools. "Robert, Dr. Lawrence has arrived for Pedrinho's session," Joachim announced, approaching the veranda. At 71, the caretaker remained active, now proudly responsible for coordinating the therapeutic garden where children learned to plant and harvest their own food. "Thank you, Joachim. I'll meet them in the therapy room." As he walked through the property towards the new annex built for sessions, Robert reflected on how his perception of success had completely changed. The man who once measured his achievements by the growth of his fortune and respect in the corporate world now found meaning in every recovered smile, every night without nightmares, every small step forward in the children under his care. Later that same day, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange hues, Michael found his father sitting by the lake, on the same wooden bench, where so many important conversations had taken place throughout that year. "May I sit?" asked the boy, already a teenager, carrying a folder of drawings under his arm. "Of course, son. How was your day?" Michael smiled, his eyes revealing a maturity that sometimes surprised even Robert. "Good." Anna finally agreed to go into the lake. First, she only dipped her feet, but then she even swam a little with me. That's a big achievement. She had a phobia of water. "Yes, I told her what Mrs. Constance taught me about the lake cleansing bad memories, just as the wind carries sadness away." Robert smiled, moved by how his son had absorbed and now transmitted the simple but profound teachings of the old woman. "And what do you have there?" he asked, pointing to the folder. Michael hesitated for a moment before opening the folder and revealing a series of drawings. Unlike his first works, full of vibrant colors and idyllic landscapes, these depicted darker memories. The Aspen mansion seen through window bars, a boy cowering in a dark corner, adult hands raised in threatening gestures. "Dr. Phillips suggested I draw the things that still scare me," Michael explained, referring to the psychologist who accompanied him. "He said that putting fears on paper is a way to get them out of your head." Robert observed the drawings in silence, respecting his son's courage in confronting his painful memories. "And is it working?" "I think so. Before, when I thought of stepmother, my heart would race and I felt like I couldn't breathe. Now it's just a memory. It no longer sends my body into a panic." Michael's emotional development continued to impress Robert, While many children needed years of therapy to reach this level of self-awareness, his son seemed to have a natural ability to process and transform his experiences. "I received a letter today," Robert commented after a few moments of contemplative silence. "I wanted to share it with you, but only if you're ready." Michael looked at his father with curiosity. "A letter from whom?" "From Deborah." The boy tensed for an instant, but did not show the fear that her name would once provoke. "What does she want?" Robert took an envelope from his pocket. "She's serving time for fraud and other crimes. According to her lawyer, she found religion in prison. She's doing therapy. She asked for permission to write to you. I refused, obviously, but she sent this letter to me, asking me to tell you something." "What?" Michael asked, his voice calm, but his eyes revealing a whirlwind of contained emotions. "She said your words in court, 'I forgive you,' haunted her for months. That at first she felt anger, then confusion, and finally understood something about herself." Robert paused. "She started painting in prison. She said she paints the lake from here, the morning light, things she never saw personally, but imagines from the descriptions she heard during the trial." Michael absorbed the information in silence, idly poking at the ground with a stick. "How do you feel about that?" Robert asked, always attentive to his son's reactions when the topic involved the traumatic past. "I'm not sure," Michael replied honestly. "I don't feel anger towards her anymore, as I said in court. But I also don't feel anything. It's strange. There's no right answer for these things, son. Can I keep the letter? Not to read now, but maybe someday." Robert handed the envelope to his son, who carefully tucked it into the folder with his drawings. As the sun disappeared over the horizon, painting the lake golden, father and son remained seated side by side, sharing one of those comfortable silences that had become an essential part of their relationship. The next morning, Robert found Michael in the lavender garden they had planted together months ago. The boy was kneeling on the earth, digging a small hole with his hands. "Good morning, son. What are you doing so early?" Michael pointed to the folder of drawings and the letter, placed on the earth next to him. "I decided I don't need to carry this anymore. I'm going to bury it here under the lavenders." Robert nodded, understanding the symbolism of that act. Lavenders, with their soft scent and calming properties, were considered by Mrs. Constance a symbol of purification and new beginnings. "Do you want help?" he asked. "No, Dad. This is something I need to do alone." Robert respected his son's wish, watching from a distance as Michael carefully placed the drawings and the still-sealed letter into the small hole and covered them with earth. Then the boy planted a small lavender bush over the spot that Joachim had set aside for him. "It's done," Michael announced, joining his father with hands still dirty from the soil, but a serene smile on his face. The following weeks brought new challenges and joys. 2 more children arrived at Rainbow House, brothers Lucas and Matthew, aged 6 and 8, rescued from a situation of abandonment. As always happened with newcomers, Michael naturally took on the role of mentor and older friend, showing them the farm, introducing the animals, and most importantly, conveying the message that they were safe there. On a particularly significant afternoon, Robert gathered all the children and the team by the lake for a small ceremony that had become a tradition at Rainbow House. Each child received a colorful paper boat on which they had written or drawn a fear or painful memory they wished to let go. "When we release our little boats into the lake," Michael explained to the newcomers, "it's as if we're sending our pains away, transforming them into something beautiful that will sail until it finds peace." One by one, each participant approached the bank and released their little boat into the crystal-clear water. The small, colorful boats formed a floating mosaic, slowly carried by the gentle current to the center of the lake. When it was Michael's turn, he hesitated for a moment, his blue paper boat firmly held between his fingers. Robert noticed something different this year. Instead of a drawing or words representing fears, his son had written only "where there is light" on the folded paper. "What does it mean?" Robert asked softly when the boy returned to his side after releasing the boat. Michael watched his creation joining the others on the mirrored surface of the lake, reflecting the golden hues of the setting sun. "It means that now I understand we no longer need darkness to appreciate the light. We can simply choose to live where it exists." That night, after all the children were settled in their beds, Robert remained on the veranda, contemplating the stars that shone in an exceptionally clear sky. Mrs. Constance joined him, bringing as always her comforting herbal tea. "You know, Mr. Robert," she began, sitting in the rocking chair beside him, When you and little Michael first arrived here, I thought you were just running away from something bad. Now I see that you were, in fact, running towards something good you hadn't yet known." Robert smiled, warmed as much by the tea as by the wise words of the old woman who had become a kind of mother to everyone on the farm. "I was a man of numbers, Mrs. Constance. I measured success in figures, power in signed contracts. I almost had to lose my son to understand what truly matters. Life has its twists and turns, doesn't it? Sometimes we need to fall to truly learn how to fly." From Michael's room, through the half-open window, came the gentle sound of his flute, a recently discovered hobby that had revealed the boy's natural talent for music. The simple, sweet melody seemed to lull the night, bringing peace to all who heard it. 3 days later, Rainbow House received a visit from state government representatives, interested in learning about and potentially replicating the care model developed by Robert. Among them was a young social worker, Paula Davies, whose observant eyes missed no detail of the institution's functioning. "It's impressive what you've built here, Mr. Henderson," she commented as Robert guided her through the property. "Most shelters I know, despite good intentions, end up being too institutional, cold. Here it feels like family." "That was exactly our goal," Robert replied proudly. "We wanted to create a place where children could feel at home, not in an institution." As they passed the lavender garden, now exuberant with its purple flowers swaying in the gentle breeze, they found Michael sitting with Lucas, the youngest of the recently arrived brothers. The 6-year-old boy, who had not yet uttered a word since arriving at the farm, listened attentively as Michael read a story, both sheltered by the shade of a leafy tree. "That's your son, isn't it?" Paula asked, observing the interaction between the two. "Yes, Michael. It was because of his journey that all this began." As they watched, something extraordinary happened. Upon finishing the story, Michael asked Lucas something, who, to the surprise of everyone aware of his situation, responded with a short but clearly audible sentence. "It's the first time he's spoken," Paula whispered, moved. Robert nodded, equally touched. "It happens a lot around here. Michael has a special way with the more traumatized children. I think they feel he truly understands, that he's been where they are now." That night, after the visitors had left, Robert found his son in his room, organizing a collection of shells and colorful stones he had gathered during his explorations around the property. "I saw what happened with Lucas today," he commented, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You have a gift, son." Michael shrugged, but a small, proud smile appeared on his face. "I just spoke to him the way I wished they had spoken to me before, without pressure, without expectations, just showing him it's safe to open up." Robert affectionately ruffled his son's hair. "When you grow up, do you already know what you want to do with your life?" The boy reflected for a moment. "I want to help children like me, maybe as a psychologist or a teacher, or maybe just stay here helping you take care of Rainbow House. Whatever your choice, I'm sure you'll make a difference in many people's lives, just as you already do." Michael smiled, his eyes reflecting a wisdom and peace that once seemed unattainable. "Dad, do you think we're different now than we were before coming here?" Robert pondered the profound question, once again admiring his son's ability to touch upon essential matters. "I think we're more authentic, as if before we were living an incomplete version of ourselves." The boy nodded, satisfied with the answer. "You know what I like most here? The silence. It's not a frightening silence, like it was when I was afraid to make noise and upset stepmother. It's a silence and full of good things." "I understand perfectly," Robert agreed, hugging his son. The next morning, a light rain fell on the farm, creating a gentle rhythm on the rooftops and nourishing the thirsty plants after days of intense sun. Robert was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, a task he would never have considered in the mansion days, but which now brought him immense pleasure. Michael entered, still in his pajamas, hair disheveled, and a sleepy smile on his face. "Good morning, Dad." "Good morning, son. Did you sleep well?" Yes. I dreamed of the lake. It was full of colorful little boats, thousands of them, and each one had a tiny light inside." Robert smiled, serving a cup of hot chocolate to the boy. "That sounds like a beautiful dream." It was. In the dream, I knew each little boat was a child who had passed through here, that even after they leave, they remain connected to us in some way. His son's sensitive observation deeply moved Robert. Indeed, some of the children sheltered at Rainbow House eventually returned to their families of origin, after professional interventions and follow-up, or were placed for adoption. But as Michael had perceived in his dream, the bond created during their time at the farm remained, transforming into a lifelong source of strength. After breakfast, despite the light rain that was still falling, Michael asked his father to accompany him to the lake. Dressed in raincoats, they walked along the muddy trail to the bank, where the boy pulled something from his pocket, a last paper boat, carefully folded and protected. "I forgot to release this one at the ceremony," he explained. "It's special." Robert watched as his son knelt by the lake's edge and gently placed the little boat in the water. Unlike the others, this one was white, with no visible drawings or words on the outside. "What's in it?" he asked, curious. Michael watched his creation slowly drift away, small raindrops dotting the white paper that contrasted with the darkened surface of the lake. "A message for whoever needs to find it someday." The two remained there side by side under the gentle rain, watching the small boat sail until it became just a white dot in the distance. It was an image that perfectly captured the journey they had traveled, from the shadows of the Aspen mansion to the renewing clarity of Clearbrook Farm, from fear to courage, from pain to healing. Robert didn't know what the future held for them, but he was certain of one thing. Together they had found a path of light, and in it they would remain, also illuminating the journey of others who, like them, sought a new beginning. The white little boat continued its journey across the lake, carrying Michael's secret message, simple yet powerful words that summarized everything he had learned in his young life. Darkness is never forever. Look for the light. It always exists somewhere. Dear listeners, we hope that Michael and Robert's journey has deeply touched your hearts. It is in the most turbulent waters that we find our true strength, and in the purest relationships that we discover the meaning of starting anew. If this story stirred emotions in you, we have a special playlist with other equally powerful narratives about overcoming and renewal. Find it by clicking here on the side. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to receive new stories daily, and leave your like as a token of appreciation. And tell us in the comments which moment of this story touched your soul the most. After all, just like Michael's paper boats, our stories only come alive when they sail into the hearts of those who hear them.